What if the reason you've never felt at home in this world is because you were never meant to belong in it as it is? What if your loneliness wasn't a flaw in your soul, but a message from something higher, pulling you away from imitation and into awakening? No one tells you that the most dangerous place for a deep soul is the center of a shallow room. So you tried to fit. You sat quietly in places that didn't deserve your silence. You nodded when your truth was begging to speak. You looked around and wondered, why does everyone seem fine with this? They were playing along, but you were seeing through. You weren't wired to play the game. You were wired to ask why the game exists. That was your first signal. And it hurt, because when you start seeing the cracks in the surface, you begin to feel like the only one still awake in a room full of sleepwalkers. You remember that moment, the cafeteria, the classroom, the birthday party, where the laughter felt distant, like you were watching the world from behind glass. You remember the moment you realized, I don't know how to be like them. And somewhere in the spaces between small talk and empty rituals, you became the observer, the outsider, the one with questions too heavy for polite conversation. They told you to lighten up. But how do you lighten what's wired to go deep? And so you became a shapeshifter, smoothing edges, softening thoughts, choking on your own brilliance to become digestible. But even that didn't work, because the thing inside you, the ache, the sight, the knowing, refused to die. It's not that you didn't belong, it's that you were never meant to belong in a world that confuses loudness with leadership, surface with strength, and sameness with safety. You are a cosmic orphan, not abandoned, just born to a family that hasn't found you yet. You're not outside the village, you're ahead of it. You're the one standing under the stars asking questions no one else dares to voice. And yes, that kind of truth costs comfort. But here's the paradox they never teach you. Being cast out can be the beginning of being called up. What if your exile wasn't punishment, but preparation? Because maybe, just maybe, you weren't made to fit the world. Maybe you were made to see it differently, so you could change it. And that changes everything. That changes. You tried. God, you tried. You watched them, smiling on cue, clapping at all the right moments, performing a kind of ease you couldn't replicate, so you copied their rhythm, you bent your spine to match their pace. You edited your wonder into bite-sized pieces they could understand. And yet, no matter how well you danced, you were always one beat off. That's the friction they never warn you about, the one that happens not when you rebel, but when you obey too long. The ache of pretending becomes unbearable, not all at once, but slowly, subtly, like wearing a mask that starts to burn into your skin. They tell you fitting in is survival, but they never tell you that it can be a slow erasure. You sit in rooms where everyone is nodding and you wonder, am I the only one who feels this is hollow? You laugh at jokes that bruise your spirit just to keep the peace. You speak softer, dream smaller, risk less, because that's what they call maturity. But maturity isn't silence, it's discernment, and you've been discerning truth for years while others were memorizing the script. Krishnamurti said, "It is no measure of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society." And you felt it, felt the sickness in the smallness, in the hunger for approval, in the worship of image, in the punishment of depth. But instead of running, you internalized it. You assumed it was you, that you were broken. And here's where the story turns. Because what if the world was wrong about you? What if that resistance you feel when you try to act normal isn't dysfunction, but integrity? You weren't made to live inside someone else's idea of safety. You weren't built for the assembly line. You weren't born to become forgettable. And that quiet voice you keep trying to mute, the one that whispers, "This isn't it, this isn't me." That voice is your wings trying to unfold inside a cage of politeness. You thought they were a burden, but they're the only thing that will lift you. And now you have a choice. fade into the background of their comfort, or step forward into the unknown of your becoming. Because the friction you feel, and that's the sound of truth grinding against illusion. It's not a sign that you're failing, it's a sign that you're waking up. And sometimes waking up looks a lot like standing alone. But stand anyway, because your presence is a mirror they're afraid to look into. And once you stop apologizing for your reflection, you begin to reclaim your design. You didn't just survive being left out, you learned to see in the dark. While others memorized the script, you were staring at the empty stage, asking what the performance was hiding, and that question, the one you carried quietly like a secret too sacred to share, was the beginning of your gift. It didn't arrive with applause, it came as silence, it came as distance, it came as the aching space between who you are and who you were told to be. And in that space, something started to grow, not all at once, but like moss, soft, steady, persistent. You began to notice the threads underneath the world. You saw how people smile to avoid being seen, how they speak to fill space but say nothing at all. You saw how belonging could sometimes look a lot like self-abandonment, and for a while, you thought that was your curse. But what if it was never a curse? What if it was calibration? There's a line from Mizuta Masahide. My barn having burned down, I can now see the moon. You were never being punished. You were being cleared, so you could see what others couldn't. You don't learn this kind of vision in school. You earn it in silence, in skipped invitations, in the ache of not being chosen. You earned it in the nights you stared out the window, feeling like you were on the wrong planet. You earned it when your voice cracked from holding in truths no one else wanted to hear. You earned it when you stopped waiting for someone to come save you and started listening to the part of you that never stopped whispering, "There is more." Henry Darger earned it too, a janitor in Chicago, invisible by day, but at night he built a universe, 15,000 pages, hundreds of illustrations, a rebellion of wonder in the face of a world that never asked who he was. He didn't build it for them, he built it to stay alive, to give his truth a shape when no one else could carry it. And maybe you've been doing the same. Maybe your silence wasn't emptiness, but incubation. Maybe the ache in your back wasn't stress, but the weight of wings still forming beneath the surface. And here's the question you've never been asked. What if the reason you felt so far from the world is because your eyes were meant to see what lies beyond it? You're not missing anything. You're carrying something. And when you finally stop asking for permission, that thing you carry starts to shine, not in volume, not in fame, but in resonance. Because the gift the outsider brings isn't the ability to fit, it's the ability to see, to feel, to know what the crowd has forgotten. You weren't rejected because you're less, you were set apart because your voice was never meant to echo. It doesn't begin with a roar, it begins with a quiet refusal. The moment you stop laughing when it's not funny, the moment you stop apologizing for the way your mind works, the moment you decide that shrinking is more painful than solitude, this is where it starts. Not as a revolution, as a reclamation, of voice, of vision, of the sacred weirdness you've been hiding for too long. The wings you once hated begin to twitch, not because they're ready to soar, but because you're ready to stop denying they're there. You spent so long thinking they were your flaw. They made you bump into things, made you look awkward, made people uncomfortable. So you tucked them in, you curved your spine, you tried to walk like them, but the wings never left. They waited, they grew in silence. And now, as you breathe deeper, as you speak more honestly, as you stand a little taller, they begin to stretch. There's a story not many know. A man named Sarmad, a poet and mystic in 17th century Delhi. He stood naked in front of emperors, refusing to recite a line he did not believe. When they asked why he wouldn't say there is no God but Allah, he said, I'm still absorbed in the there is no God part. Why should I lie? They beheaded him. But not before he became immortal, not before he became the embodiment of a truth too wild for comfort, too deep for dogma, too sacred to be caged. Sarmad didn't die because he was wrong. He died because he was unshakably real, and maybe you don't face swords, but you've been asked to lie every day, to lie about who you are, to lie about what you feel, to lie about what you see when no one else is looking. But you can't unsee, you can't unknow, and you can't stay small for their comfort without killing something inside you. So you stop, not loudly, just honestly, and that's when it happens. The breaking, the blooming, the shift. You feel it in your back, the wings unfurling. You feel it in your voice, no longer filtered, no longer rehearsed. You feel it in your breath, like coming up for air after a lifetime underwater. You don't need their stage. You don't need their spotlight. You need space. You need sky. Because flight isn't about being seen, it's about being free. This is not rebellion. This is remembrance. And now you're rising. Not to impress, not to prove, but because your soul has finally grown too large for the cage it once agreed to live in. You spent years thinking the weight you carried was weakness. But now you feel it, don't you? That it wasn't heaviness, it was mass, it was momentum. Something is rising, not because the world changed, but because you stopped waiting for it to. You're no longer asking for space, you're claiming it. Not with force, but with the quiet power of someone who's finally done apologizing for needing room to breathe. This is what the Fringe was always for, not exile, elevation. You were never meant to climb the same ladders. You were meant to build wings in silence. And now they're moving, not in grand spectacle, but in subtle certainty, like something ancient waking up in your back. Not everyone will see it, not everyone needs to, because this moment isn't about recognition, it's about return. Return to the self you hid to survive. You spent so long trying to be digestible, you forgot how to taste your own voice. But now you remember. This is the outsider's advantage. You've spent a lifetime on the fringe, watching, sensing, surviving. While they rehearsed their lines, you learned how the story really works. You learned that performance is brittle, but perception, that's power. They told you to be more like them. But what they didn't understand was that the version of you they were afraid of was the one built for flight. You weren't rejected, you were refined. You weren't overlooked. You were overqualified for a life built on imitation, and now you see it clearly. The patterns, the energy, the way people bend themselves for belonging they never truly feel. But you've been forged by solitude, tempered by rejection, shaped in the silence they ran from. You have depth because you dared to descend. This is what they never counted on, that the one they pushed to the edge would end up seeing the entire field. You were never behind, you were off the map. And that's where all the real discoveries happen. Henry Darger was off the map, a janitor in the shadows, invisible. But in the hours no one was watching, he was building an empire of imagination. 15,000 pages, entire universes, not to be seen. But because he couldn't not create, he never found his place, so he made one. And maybe that's your task now, not to wait for the world to notice, but to build what only you can build. You weren't born to fit in, you were born to remember. To remember the map that lives in your bones, to remember the sound of your own breath when it's not being measured against someone else's rhythm. And yes, your voice may still shake, your wings may still feel untested, but the sky, it doesn't ask for proof, it just waits for you to lift. So let me ask you directly, what if you're not broken? What if you're simply built for altitudes they've never dared to climb? This isn't a metaphor anymore, it's a decision. Not to be louder, but to be clearer. Not to rise above them, but to rise fully into you, because the sky was never meant for the many. It was made for the ones who looked up when everyone else looked away. And now, it's calling your name. You thought you were the only one, didn't you? The only one who felt like a stranger in every room. The only one who couldn't laugh at the things everyone else found funny. The only one who woke up tired. Not from sleep, but from pretending. But here's the truth. You were never alone. You were just one of the first to question, the first to feel everything all at once, the first to stop pretending. and because no one else was saying it out loud, you assumed it was only you. But slowly, quietly, others begin to surface. One comment, one message, one look across the room that says, "I see you." And in that moment, the fracture becomes a mirror. The ache becomes a bridge. This is what they don't tell you. The outsider doesn't stay on the edge forever. They become the outline of what comes next. You were never exiled. You were appointed to be the one who sees first, feels first, says it first. And maybe that's a heavy role, but look around now. We're not as few as we thought. All over the world, there are others who've been carrying this same ache, this same question, this same silent scream, and now we're answering each other. Not with noise, but with knowing. So here's the invitation, not from a channel, not from a brand, from one soul to another. If this reached you, light the signal. Comment below with the word Fringe, not to be trendy, but to be found. Let the others see that we were never scattered. We were just waiting for the courage to speak. Because once one person does, the silence breaks, the map expands, and the orphans find each other. You were never the only one. You were just the one who refused to disappear. And now that you've spoken, you've made it easier for someone else to breathe. So let them find you here in the quiet, in the comment, in the line that made your chest ache because it finally put a name to your experience. You don't need to explain it. Just leave the signal. Fringe. Because this was never about building followers. It was about building a home for the ones who feel too much to pretend anymore. And if they still don't get it, that's okay. The middle was never meant to hold you. You were made for the edges. You were shaped in the dark. You were raised by silence, and now you speak, not to be heard, but to be whole, not to be popular, but to be real. And in that realness, you've done what most never will. You've come home, not in the noise, but in the truth. And the truth, it's been waiting for you, just like we have. We see you, and you're not alone anymore.